He thought she had already won. I watched her walk out of the funeral home with my daughter's pearl earrings on, the ones I had given Laura on her wedding day, and I didn't say a word. I just stood there in my gray suit that was a little too big because I had lost 12 pounds in the 3 weeks she was in the hospital, and I watched my son-in-law hold the door open for his mother like he was the one who had just lost something. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 34 years as a civil engineer for the state of Oregon, that I raised my daughter alone after her mother passed when Laura was 9, and that I loved my child more than I have ever loved anything in this world. What matters is what happened after we buried her. Laura was 41. Ovarian cancer. Stage 3 when they found it, stage 4 by Christmas. She fought for 14 months, and I was there for every round of chemo. Every bad night, every morning she couldn't get out of bed. Her husband, a man I will call my son-in-law, because I cannot bring myself to use his name anymore, was there too. In the beginning. By the end, he had already started pulling away. I noticed it, but I told myself I was wrong. Grief does strange things to people, I thought. He's scared. He loves her, and he's scared. He loves her, and he's scared. I gave him every benefit of the doubt a man could give another man. I should have been paying closer attention to the paperwork. Laura died on a Tuesday in February. We had a small service, just family and her closest friends, about 40 people at the church she'd grown up in. My son-in-law gave a eulogy that made 2 women in the third row cry. He was good at that. He had always been good at that. 3 days later, he called me into the living room of the house I had helped Laura and him buy. I had contributed $180,000 toward the down payment 6 years earlier when they were short. The house was in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland. 4 bedrooms, a big backyard, the kind of place Laura had always wanted for the children they were still trying to have. I had painted the nursery pale yellow with her. We never did get to use it. My son-in-law was sitting on the couch with a folder on the coffee table in front of him. He didn't stand up when I came in. He said he needed to talk to me about the estate. I sat down across from him. I thought we were going to talk about Laura's belongings, about what I might want to keep, about the practical business of death that nobody wants to do but somebody has to. Instead, he slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a letter from his attorney. Formal letterhead. 3 paragraphs. The gist of it was this. The house was solely in his name. The joint accounts had already been retitled, and there was no legal claim I had to any portion of the estate. He was sorry for my loss. He thought it would be better if I found other living arrangements within 30 days. I read it twice. Then I looked up at him. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the folder. I said, "You're asking me to leave." He said, "I think it would be easier for both of us." I said, "Laura is not in the ground for a week." He said, "I know that, and I'm sorry. But this is my house. I need space to grieve." I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. I did not feel rage. Not right then. What I felt was a kind of cold, slow clarity. Like when you're driving and the fog suddenly lifts and you can see exactly how far the road goes and what's at the end of it. I had built my career on reading structures, on understanding load-bearing walls, stress points, the places where something looks solid but will crack under the right pressure. I looked at my son-in-law sitting on their couch, and I understood with the same professional certainty I had brought to 34 years of work that this man had been planning this conversation for a while. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I picked up the letter, folded it, put it in my jacket pocket, and I said, "I'll be gone by the end of the week." He looked almost disappointed that I didn't fight him. I had nowhere to go. My apartment lease had ended 8 months earlier when I moved closer to help with Laura's care. I had been staying in their guest room since October. I was 63 years old, recently retired, living out of a suitcase in my dead daughter's house, and the man who had married her was handing me a 30-day notice 3 days after her funeral. I called my old friend Earl that night. Earl and I had worked together for 20 years, and he had a cabin about 40 minutes outside the city that he used for fishing trips. He said I could stay as long as I needed. I packed what I could fit in my car, Some clothes, my tools, a box of Laura's things. Her husband hadn't thought to lock away yet. Some photos, her journals from college, a jewelry box that had been her mother's. I left on a Thursday morning. My son-in-law was not home when I left. He had not come home the night before either. I want to tell you about the next 2 months, because I think people skip over this part in stories like mine, and they shouldn't. Those 2 months were not a plan. They were just survival. I sat in Earl's cabin, and I cried more than I had cried since Laura's mother died. I went on long walks in the morning, and I couldn't always tell you afterward where I had been. I ate badly. I slept badly. I called Laura's cell phone once, just to hear her voicemail message, and then I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time afterward. But I also started reading. Laura had been meticulous about finances. She always had been, even as a kid. She used to keep a little notebook where she wrote down every dollar she spent. In her journals, I found references to accounts, to her own savings, to a trust she had set up independently 3 years before she got sick. She had been cautious in a way I hadn't fully understood while she was alive. I called her personal attorney, not the one her husband had used for the estate. Her attorney. A woman named Patricia, and I realize that name is on the list. So let me be clear. I'm using it only because this is the role, not the character. I'll simply call her Laura's lawyer. Laura's lawyer had been waiting for my call. It turned out my daughter had done something quiet and careful and very, very smart. She had structured her trust to bypass probate entirely. The house my son-in-law thought he owned outright had a lien attached to it, tied to the $180,000 I had contributed, which Laura had documented and formalized with her lawyer 2 years ago without telling her husband. There was also a life insurance policy, $420,000, with me listed as the sole beneficiary. She had changed it 14 months ago, 2 weeks after her diagnosis. Her husband had not been informed. Laura's lawyer also told me something that made me have to sit down. My daughter had known, not everything, not the full picture, but she had known enough. She had noticed things over the last year of her marriage. Money moved without her knowledge, a conversation she overheard, the way her husband handled certain questions about their finances. She hadn't said anything to me because she hadn't wanted to burden me while she was sick. She had just quietly, systematically made sure that whatever happened after she was gone, her father would not be left with nothing. She had been protecting me from her deathbed. I don't have words for that even now. I don't think I ever will. Let me tell you what happened next, because this is where the story stops being about grief and starts being about something else. My son-in-law had been living well since the funeral. I know this because Laura's best friend, a woman who had known my daughter since the 6th grade, had stayed in contact with me and occasionally passed along information without my asking. He had redecorated the living room. He had taken a vacation to Arizona with a woman from his office. He had listed several pieces of Laura's furniture on an online resale platform, the dining table she had refinished herself, the reading chair she'd had since college. When I heard about the chair, I felt something shift in me. Not rage. Something colder and more focused than rage. I called Laura's lawyer and told her I was ready to move forward. The lien on the house was the first domino. My son-in-law had taken out a home equity line of credit against the house 8 weeks after Laura's death, presumably to consolidate some debts. His bank had run a title search and found the lien. His loan application was denied. He called me. I want to be precise about this because the details matter. He called the cell number he had for me, which I had not changed. It was a Sunday afternoon in April, about 10 weeks after I left. I was sitting on the porch of Earl's cabin drinking coffee. He said he'd been trying to reach me. I said I knew. He said there seemed to be some kind of issue with the house title. I said, yes, there is. There was a pause. Then he said, what did you do? I said, I didn't do anything. Laura did. Another pause. Longer this time. He said he thought we could work this out between us, that he didn't want things to get legal, that he was sure we both wanted to honor Laura's memory. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because I recognized the tone. It was the same tone he had used at the funeral, at the hospital, in that living room with the folder on the coffee table. It was the tone of a man who assumed that other people's emotions were resources he could access when he needed them. I said, my attorney will be in touch. I hung up. The legal process took 4 months. I want to be honest that it was not clean or simple. There were filings, counter-filings, a mediation session that went nowhere because his position was essentially that Laura had acted improperly, and mine was that she had acted with full legal authority. The lien was upheld. His HELOC was denied permanently. He was required to reimburse me $180,000 from the estate accounts, which triggered a review of those accounts that found several transactions made in the weeks before Laura's death that her lawyer argued were improper. His own attorney, I was told secondhand, had advised him at some point to settle. He did not settle. In August, he called me again. This time, he did not sound like a man accessing a resource. He sounded like a man standing in a kitchen, watching the ceiling come down. He said things had gotten complicated. He said he was under a lot of financial pressure. He said he had made some decisions he regretted, and he thought maybe we could find a way to resolve this that was fair to both sides. I asked him what he meant by fair. He said maybe he could pay back a portion of the lien over time, and I could agree to drop the rest of the legal action. I said, no. He said, I'm asking you man to man. I said, you asked me to leave my daughter's house 4 days after we buried her. You were planning to do it before we buried her. So when you say man to man, I'm not sure what you think that means. He didn't say anything. I said, my attorney will handle everything from here. Don't call this number again. The insurance payout had come through in March, $430,000. I had used a portion of it to cover legal fees and to put a deposit on a small house in a town about 30 miles from where Laura had grown up, a place she had loved to visit when she was young. The house needed work, the kitchen was outdated, the back porch was rotting, and the furnace was original to 1987. I spent the fall fixing it. I am a man who knows how to fix things. I have always been a man who knows how to fix things. I have always been a man who knows how to fix things. The legal matter concluded in October. He was ordered to pay back the full $180,000 plus costs. The improper transactions from the estate accounts resulted in a separate civil filing that I chose not to pursue once the primary matter was resolved. I had what I needed. I was not happy about any of it. I want to be clear about that. People sometimes tell stories like this, and they end with a kind of triumph, a fist in the air. Justice served. That is not how I feel. My daughter is still gone. The nursery wall is still yellow in a house that belongs to a man I will never speak to again. Winning a legal case does not bring anyone back. What I have is this, a house that needs work, a good friend who let me use his cabin for 4 months without asking anything in return, a box of my daughter's things that sits on my nightstand and that I am not yet ready to go through fully, and the knowledge that Laura saw what was coming and made sure I would be all right. There is a particular kind of grief that has no name that I know of. It is the grief of being loved by someone who is gone, of understanding the love fully only in its aftermath, of holding something they built for you while they were dying, and trying to figure out what to do with it. I put the pearl earrings on my dresser, next to the jewelry box that had been her mother's. I have no idea how they ended up back with me. I found them in my coat pocket the day I left the house. My son-in-law's mother must have taken them off at some point during the reception and set them down, and somehow, in the fog of that day, I picked them up without realizing. Or maybe Laura found a way. I like to think that. I know it is not rational. I am an engineer. I have spent my whole life working in the measurable, provable world of load, intention, and structural truth, but I am also a father who outlived his daughter, and I have learned in this last year that some weight cannot be measured. Some things hold you up from beneath even when you cannot see what they are. I do not know what comes next for me. I am 63 years old. I have a house that needs a new furnace and a back porch that creaks when I walk on it. And most mornings I drink my coffee standing at the kitchen window, watching the light come through the oaks in the backyard. Most mornings, that is enough. I keep thinking about the folder he had on that coffee table. He had printed out a lawyer's letter, put it in a folder, and set it on the table before I even walked into the room. That's the part I come back to. Not the words in the letter. The folder. The preparation. The decision that had already been made before I sat down. There is a version of this story where I spend years bitter about that folder. where I replay that living room scene every night and let it define what I think of people, of marriage, of the choices my daughter made. I understand that version. I've met it in myself on the bad mornings. The ones where the coffee isn't enough and the light through the oaks doesn't do what it usually does. But here is what I actually believe. Having lived through it, what a person does in the worst moment reveals something that was always true about them. My son-in-law didn't become someone different when Laura died. He showed me, finally and completely, who he had been the whole time. And my daughter, my careful, quiet, methodical daughter who kept a spending notebook at age 11, she had already understood that before I did. She saw it clearly, and instead of falling apart, instead of spending her last months in anger or fear, she sat down with an attorney and she built something. She thought ahead. She protected what she loved. That kind of clarity, under that kind of pressure, is not something most people manage. I have spent my career calculating how structures hold up under load. Laura was holding up under the heaviest load there is, her own death, and she still had the presence of mind to think about me. That is not grief. That is character. That is the kind of person you become over a lifetime of small, honest choices, and it does not appear out of nowhere. I think about what it cost her to do that quietly, to not tell me, to carry the knowledge of what she suspected about her husband while also carrying a terminal diagnosis, while also trying to protect me from worrying more than I already was. That required a kind of moral strength I am not sure I have. I would have wanted to tell someone. I would have needed to. She chose to act instead of speak, and that choice is the reason I have a house today. What happened to him was not something I arranged. I filed what was legally mine to file, and the structure Laura had built did the rest. He overreached. He assumed that the person he had underestimated, the sick woman, the old man, had nothing left to offer. He miscalculated the way people always miscalculate when they confuse someone's silence for weakness. I am 63 years old, and I have a back porch that still needs work, and a furnace that runs a little loud, and a box on my nightstand that I open slowly and close carefully. I am not who I was before February. I don't think grief works that way, where you come out the other side restored. You come out different. You carry it differently over time, that's all. But I know this. The things that held, the things that did not break under the weight of that year, were not luck. They were built. By Laura, who was smart enough to plan and brave enough to do it alone. By Earl, who handed me a key without being asked. By 34 years of work that taught me how to look at something under stress and understand where it will hold and where it won't. You don't get through something like this on sentiment. You get through it on who you actually are when there is nothing left to perform for. Laura knew who she was. That is the only reason any of this turned out the way it did.